I've been needing to do some yard work around the property, and the main thing that I need to do is get rid of some of the garbage pieces of wood that I have lying around. And I thought that maybe this dump truck would be handy to use. I should probably be cutting grass and getting access to where the rotten wood is. But I thought, what would I rather be doing? I know, starting the Avalanche. I haven't run this dump truck for about 2 years now. I got it for free from a friend of mine. It was a get it out of there type deal. And it ran well enough to get parked here. I put in hydraulic fluid and got the bed to lift up. And the fuel tank was pretty nasty when I got it. I drained that old fuel. The fuel pump also needed to be replaced, and I hand cut the diaphragm from a piece of Buna N rubber. And actually the first thing that I used was an old bike tire, and that worked. But I found out that the bike tire rubber does not hold up to gasoline, so that worked for about 3 days. And then it didn't work. But as far as I know, the diaphragm that I put in this fuel pump is working. Again, that was when I put it together. So let's try and fire this one up, and maybe we can use it to get a job done. I've got the former gas truck battery, former Thunderbird battery in here now. And one thing that I know for sure is that this accelerator pump is bad on the carburetor. So that is going to be leaking fuel slightly. So I'm going to put some gas in the carb and monitor that, but hopefully it'll be a runner. Not sure what critter put all of this grass in here. That wasn't here the last time I was. Nice dry spot for a little home. But if this accelerator pump leaks, I'm not going to want gas all over it. I'm also going to check the brake fluid right now. Remember, it's got a pretty good emergency brake off the drive shaft, so I can rely on that while I'm in the yard here. Brake fluid is bone dry, so I'm going to go get a little funnel so that I can add some, see if I'll get pressure on the brake pedal. There's also a hydraulic clutch, which I was surprised to see. I forgot about that. And that is also bone dry, so I'm going to add some brake fluid to both of those. Since I know it's been sitting for a while, normally I would put gas in the tank before I primed this carburetor, so that with the priming, once it got running, then it would just start drawing fuel out of the tank. I would like to hear this one pop before I do that, so I'm not too worried about the diaphragm being dried out, because I remember replacing that pretty recently. And so let's see if it makes some noise. I'm going to put gas right down into the float bowl. And that way when it starts running, it'll have a little reserve to feed itself off of. There, we've got some out of the accelerator pump already. So I know that's still rotten. Well, let's see what we've got. Okay, well, that's about what I was expecting, was hopeful. I'll take off the distributor cap, see if those points are opening and closing, and go from there. I did get some pressure in the brake pedal. Haven't found any pressure in the clutch pedal yet, so I'm not sure how that's going to turn out. It might just need to be bled. It also could be the master cylinder is no good. We'll see. Can't quite tell what's going on with the points. I'll need a little flashlight to get in there. The points appear to be just barely opening and closing, so I'm going to adjust that point cap a little wider. If I was in the field, I'd use a matchbook to set the gap, but since I have my whole toolbox here, I'm going to use my feeler gauge, and I'll set it for 020 is usually a safe bet. I don't have the user manual in front of me, but 020 is usually my go-to. Got the point set on the highest part of the cam of the distributor, which is where you want it to set the point gap. Put my feeler gauge in there. When you set the point gap, you want there to be just a little bit of resistance. So you want that feeler gauge to just drag ever so slightly as you pull it out of there. That, I believe, I set too big, so I'm going to loosen it up again. That seems better. Just verify that they are closing all the way. Which they are. There I can see them opening again. So we'll see if that little point adjustment did the trick. I'm also going to throw just a little splash of gas down the carb again, because I see this accelerator pump is letting it out pretty quick, so we're not maintaining very much of the gas that we put in the carb. Okay, still no luck. It's time to get a little bit more into checking for spark. I suspect that that's the problem. We know it's got fuel because we poured gas in there multiple times. We know it's got air because air cleaner is off and carburetor is wide open. So I'm going to pull one of these plug wires and get a screwdriver close to the block and see if we are getting any sort of spark whatsoever. If we're not, I do have a spare set of points. I'm pretty convinced that it's not going to be the coil, so we'll go from there. I've got a screwdriver just barely set there. I'm not sure with the engine turning over if it's going to vibrate loose or not, but we'll give it a try. And I can turn the key and look through a gap in the hood to see if I'm getting spark. I'm going to be looking for that spark right in there. Yeah, I was a little worried of that. Maybe that will work. Okay, so I'm not seeing spark there, but if I was going to see spark, I probably would have seen it there. So I'm going to suspect points. And I'll just make sure that I have a spare set. I'm also going to make sure that I have battery power at the coil. That's the most simple thing. But I'm pretty convinced that I would. But you don't know until you check. With the key on, I do have battery power at the coil. So I know that that is good. So the next thing to go for is the points in a no spark situation. Thought I replaced these points a few years ago when I got it running, but maybe I didn't. It's also possible that they wore down that quickly. Doesn't take very much corrosion of an engine sitting for the points to get messed up. And I could try to file them down too and clean them. Because they do look pretty new. So we'll try that. I'll get a little piece of emery cloth and I'll sand those points down just a little bit to clean them up before I take them out of there. And I'll also bring out the extra set of points that I have and verify that those are the correct ones. So what I like to do when I'm filing points is have the points on the low spot of the cam on the distributor so that the points are closed. And I kind of close the little piece of emery cloth in there so that there's light pressure. And then I just very so slightly sand the points down. The pressure of the points holding themselves together is plenty. And it doesn't take much to clean those points off. And these do appear to be the proper set of replacement points. So we'll give it a shot with the sanded down points. I see that they are a little bit more worn than I thought. They're certainly not a brand new set. So potentially they will need to be replaced. But we clean them, set the gap correctly. We will put the rotor back in. That would be embarrassing. Cap looks good. Rotor looks good. So end up needing to do a set of points, that's kind of fair game with set up like this. Just put less gas in the carb this time, just in case I happen to be flooding it, which I don't think so. I think we've confirmed that spark is the issue. No spark is the issue. I'm convinced. Let's get those points out of there and we'll try this again. Points almost appear to have like a wick on the little block that runs on the distributor cam, and I've seen something like that before, but I thought it was kind of like behind the block that runs on the cam, and this appears to be like the whole cam, the whole block itself. Oh, okay, I guess it is just riding on the cam. Points look a little burned. They don't look that old though. I'm gonna leave the wick off of there. I do need to go get some grease and put some on the block here. You want just a little bit of grease on the back of this block so it doesn't wear down too quickly. And sometimes they'll give you a little pocket of grease in the replacement box, but these are new old stock, so these are 70s points. They didn't believe in little packets of grease back then. You had to supply your own. I've been feeling a little bit of pressure in the brake pedal, so I believe that was just the master cylinder needed to bleed itself after sitting dry for so long. I'm not feeling any resistance on the clutch master cylinder. So I'm just gonna open up that bleeder valve. I know I've got fluid in the reservoir. So I'll open up that bleeder valve while I'm doing the points and just see if we're getting any fluid through there or not. If we get fluid through the bleeder valve and we still don't have any pressure, then it's probably pretty sure that it's the master cylinder. But we'll see. That bleeder valve's got quite a bit of resistance, so I'm going to put some penetrating oil on that too and let that sit. Okay, we've got a little bit of oil on that bleeder valve for the clutch cylinder. Let that sit. I looked in the book when I was in there, and the point gap they want, 0.015. So I was close with my guess at 0.20. Can't imagine that 5 thousandths is going to make too much of a difference, but we will set it to specifications. Give us all the help we can. I put just a small dab of grease behind the block that rides on the cam on the distributor. I don't know if anybody ever played that game, Operation. I used to hate that game. But every time that I'm dealing with tiny little screws in a distributor, I think of that game. Don't touch the sides. Don't lose the screws. Or you'll hear the buzzer. Seemed like every time I tried to play that game, the batteries were always dead, which was fine because I hated the buzzing sound, but sure makes that game a lot easier if you don't have any batteries in there. Okay, the screws are just barely set, so I can move that point back and forth. Get out 015 instead of 020. That actually feels pretty good. That initial set. Tighten the screw down and make sure that we still have a little bit of resistance. No. Oh, that would have been too easy. I seem to remember putting new points in this when I was getting it running a few years ago. And if they were burned already to the point of that they're not working, there's a potential that this little ballast resistor is not working correctly. These ballast resistors are kind of like a mystery to me, but what they're supposed to do is give the points full 12-volt power when you're starting, and then as the resistor heats up, it prevents power from getting through and it drops it down to about 6 volts so that the points don't burn up prematurely. That's what my notion of how that works. Okay, the wires are connected again. Point gap should be set accurately. Just turn the engine over a little bit by hand to make sure that they're opening and closing before we get that distributor cap back on there. It's unclosed. There's them open. Put my feeler gauge away. But there's slight resistance at 015. Put our rotor back in. And now we'll see if bad points were the problem. Still have a little splash of gas in our cup, so we'll put that in and we'll hopefully hear some noise. That, ladies and gentlemen, is some noise that we wanted to hear. So that's good. We heard it pop. I'm gonna put some gas in the tank, and I'm also gonna try to break this bleeder valve on the clutch reservoir. But we're looking in good shape. So let's see if that penetrating oil did the trick for getting this bleeder valve open. Usually when those master cylinders go dry, they pretty easily prime themselves, or bleed themselves. And the fact that I'm getting zero resistance on that pedal makes me a little suspicious that I'm gonna get what I need out of this. That bleeder valve does not want to open in the least bit. So I might try to figure out how to get a socket on there. It doesn't want to budge. And I don't want to shear that bleeder valve off. Good. Got it to break. I mean, got it to move. Didn't break it. Got it to crack open. So we'll leave that open a little bit. We'll see if we can see fluid out of there eventually. And if not, then that would make sense how there's no pressure on the pedal if there's no fluid getting through there. Okay, so we should have the bleeder valve open on the clutch reservoir, on the clutch cylinder, so that should be good. I'm gonna let this engine run a little bit more. I only put about a gallon or two inside the tank. That should be enough to at least get to the pickup tube. We'll run this engine a little more and see if we can't get fuel coming through the line. That would have been the fuel out of the float bowl. Not yet seeing anything coming through the fuel filter. I've got one of those glass fuel filters on there with a cleanable reservoir, which is not ideal for going down the road with, but perfectly fine for yard work. I like to put those on while I'm running an engine that hasn't been run for a while, and that way I can clean out the fuel filter. I can see what sort of sediment I'm getting from out of the tank. I can also see if I'm even getting fuel from the tank. Those are all things that make it worthwhile to use. They're not super reliable because if the glass breaks, then you have fuel all over your engine bay, which is not good. But I filled this float bowl up again, or at least it's almost filled again. And we'll let it run its course one more time, see if we don't get any fuel through that line. Still not seeing anything through the line, so there's a good chance. It also feels like that glass is pretty loose in there, so possibly it's just sucking air. It's a good possibility of that. So I'll tighten up this glass on this fuel filter a little more, and we'll do that again. Fuel filter's got quite a bit of rusty sediment in the glass. Fuel filter element itself still looks clean enough. see if we're not seeing any fluid out of that bleeder valve. So potentially the fluid is having trouble moving from that reservoir into the cylinders. Use a little nylon brush to clean off the rubber gasket that holds this glass tight. This rubber gasket on the fuel filter element is slightly cracked, so we may not have too much luck. With the fuel filter, might be sucking air. We'll see. Filling up that float bowl once again. I like doing that much better than pouring gas down though, because if you do that, you'll get the engine to pop, but if the carb is dry, then it doesn't have anything to go off of. And it can take a while of the engine running before the fuel pump can draw that fuel from the tank. And so you've seen how the engine will stay running for quite a while out of the fuel that's in the float bowl. And most carburetors have some sort of passage to the float bowl, so it's always best to, if you can, fill that up. Still nothing in the fuel filter. So we're potentially looking at a bad fuel pump. Could pull that off. Could also try putting a little more gas in the tank itself. There's a potential that just that gallon or two that I put in there wasn't enough to get to the pickup tube. It's not very likely, but that's a possibility. I'm kind of hesitant to pour a bunch of gas in that tank if it's not going to be working. If the fuel pump's not going to be working. Still no fluid coming out of that bleeder valve. So we've potentially got some issues with the reservoir being clogged at the bottom, something like that. I'm probably going to take this hose off, dip it in the can of gas that I have, pour some gas in the carb again, and that way I'll be able to verify if the fuel pump is working at all. Okay, so I've got my fuel line taken off from the line on the truck. I've got it set in a cup of gas. That's easier than getting that whole gas can down in the engine bay. And so now when I fire up the engine, it should draw it up out of that cup. And that way we'll be able to verify if the fuel pump is working. There's also a chance that the little needle and seat has been varnished closed, so I'll give that a little bit of a tap. That could be another reason of why it's not drawing gas up in there. But we should at least be able to see fuel in our fuel filter after we turn the engine over, if that fuel pump is working. inside the truck, I could see the level of the cup going down, so I know that its fuel pump's working, which is good. I'm also seeing quite a bit of gas leak out of this fuel filter, so potentially it is drawing air in, and it almost looks like it's leaking out of the fuel pump itself, not of the diaphragm, but on the gasket below the diaphragm. That gasket feels pretty hard. So I might be taking that fuel pump out of there anyways. Making progress, even though it may not seem like it. Getting there. So seeing how much fuel was coming out of the bottom of that fuel pump, I'm just going to take that fuel pump out of there. It's going to be easier to service with it out of the vehicle. I still have not seen a drop of brake fluid come out of the bleeder valve, so I think I'm going to need to take some drastic measures on that one. I almost wonder if this reservoir is so full of gunk that it's not even draining out of the bottom of the reservoir. Is what I suspect, but I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to deal with that. So I might have to take the master cylinder out to clean it up before that can even be bled. But then I can verify the bore of that and clean it up if I have to. These fuel pump bolts were barely even tight. Surprised it was being held to the block okay. Gasket to the block looks in good shape. But this gasket in here feels hard, and that's where the majority of it was leaking out of. This gasket right in there. So let's bring it over to the bench. So I've got the fuel pump over at the workbench. I'm just going to take apart the bottom of the pump because that's where the gasket was leaking from. That cork gasket seems in okay shape. Ah, interesting. The head of that screw is one that I've normally seen on, last time I saw that was on a Chevy. Luckily I've got those screw heads. Can't remember what they're called. I've got a set of them. Maybe it'll say on the bracket of the set. Also want to make sure that I clock this when I take this off. I'm not sure if there will be a way to clock that, so I'll just take a photo of it, but it looks like pretty similar to where the input is. Output will be just to the right of that. I'll be able to remember that. So I'm gonna go find those driver heads so that I can take the bottom of that pump off. Also gonna clean up this sediment bowl a little bit, try to, because it looks filthy. It's all those fine rust dirt particles out of the tank. Probably be getting those for quite a while until I take the tank out and clean it. I've done that on a lot of my other vehicles. You put a piece of chain in the tank and roll the tank around in some tires in the yard or something, and then pull the chain out, and that does a pretty good job of cleaning out the inside of the tank. Sediment bowl is better, but I might need to just take this fuel filter off of there. That rubber is cracked. Dried and cracked. Didn't find the O-ring. Didn't find an O-ring that was the right size. Found the drivers. Don't know the names of them yet. That bolt is also not in there very tight, so that could be part of the reason why the gasket was not operating. It also does not, the gasket feels like it's very dried and crusty. I'm sure that's not the only reason. Running into little resistance there. Okay, there we go. Okay, this is also a homemade gasket of mine. Since I have it all the way apart, it wouldn't really make sense to not put a different gasket in there. When I went looking for another O-ring, I found my extra fuel filter, so I'll be able to use that, and then I can track down some O-rings to make this other one usable again. I think part of the problem with this gasket that I cut out before is that it was thick enough where it had some give and allowed the fuel to soak in, but then it became brittle. And I'm gonna try using a thinner gasket. It looks like it's similar material that you'd find in a carburetor, and hopefully that will do a good job. I also have still a roll of that Buna N, but I want to avoid using that if I can, because that's so good for fuel diaphragms. I don't really want to waste it on something that doesn't need to be flexible. It's got that web of material inside of there so that it can bend back and forth as a diaphragm. And this is not in that sort of a location, so it does not need to have that feature. And then after that, for today, it's going to be time to clean up, put this stuff away, because the mosquitoes are coming out, and my outside workbench is not necessary anymore. also think I'm going to put that little sediment bowl, I'm going to make that out of this material as well. I made it out of cork, and that still seems pliable. So maybe it was just because the sediment bowl wasn't tightened down enough. But I don't really need that to be made out of cork. Looks like that's the size that I'm after. I don't really know. I mean, this gasket is the same shape of what came out of there before, but I feel like it could just be a ring around the outside of that part of the fuel pump. There isn't really anything that it's doing. Oh, I guess it does. This separates. I see. Never mind. It separates two different parts of the fuel pump, so that's why it has that shape. Who am I to question the original design of a fuel pump gasket? Probably a reason why it's the shape that it is. Okay, and with that on the engine, that is clocked slightly to the right. I'm going to tighten this one more than it was last time. That gasket looks like it has a lot less give, so hopefully that means there'll be less ways that it can loosen up. I don't know, it's a little bit small. That cork might have shrank a little bit, so I guess it does need to fit inside of there. Once again, just me out here trying to reinvent the wheel. Make it the same size that it was. Measured twice. Cut twice. Just kidding, I know that's not how that saying goes. This is like arts and crafts, but for cars. It's like arts and crafts, but if you get it wrong, your engine catches on fire. gets a little engine fire anyways. Then you can just make a cool YouTube video about it. Just kidding, don't do that. Okay, that fits in there. And again, I'm going to tighten down the holder for the sediment bowl slightly more than it was. Don't want to crack the glass, but if you had gas leaking out of it, there's probably a reason. Seems okay. So I'm gonna put the fuel pump back in there, and I'm also gonna take out that master cylinder for the clutch, because I think that what's happening is the reservoir is full of stuff, full of mud. So I'll take that out so that I can clean it. I'm gonna do that on the bench in the shop, since my outside time is limited for the rest of the evening. And hopefully then that's all it takes. I can also check out the plunger in there, make sure that the plunger isn't bad when I clean it out. And I may have a plunger, I may not, depends on if it's the same size as a brake master cylinder. We'll see. I'm definitely hearing these mosquitoes, so that's gonna make this job not too fun to continue. If you rush a mechanic job, chances are the results are gonna be less than preferable. Okay. I was hoping to test my new fuel pump gasket before the sun went down, but it's just gone under the horizon. So I'm going to take out the master cylinder for the clutch, and I'm going to call it a day after that. Okay, so my assumption was correct. I know this reservoir is full. I just took this line off. I should have fluid coming out of there, which means that this reservoir is so gunked up with mud and old brake fluid that it's just not gonna let any fluid out of there. This is where my camera battery dies, but I get the reservoir out, and I'll show you the results of cleaning that up and putting the truck back together in a different video. Stay tuned to Mad Eye Metal.